The dare that changed. Everything it started, like most bad decisions, with a dare. My friends and I were sitting on the crumbling steps of an old shop, the kind of late-night hangout where the streetlights barely worked and the silence pressed in heavier than the air. Raza was the one who brought it up first, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "You know that hospital on the edge of town? The one that burned down?" he asked, a sly grin spreading across his face. I felt my stomach tighten. Everyone knew about that hospital. Abandoned for decades, stories about it floated through the town like smoke. People said the fire hadn't killed everyone inside. Some patients had never left, trapped, not by walls, but by something far darker. Sana, the bravest of us, laughed it off. "Oh, come on, it's just a building. Rats and dust, that's all." But Raza shook his head. "No, people hear things there, see things. My cousin swears he saw lights in the windows. And you," he pointed at me, "you're the one who always says ghosts don't exist. So prove it." The group's eyes turned to me, the challenge hanging thick in the air. I opened my mouth to refuse, to tell them that exploring burned-down hospitals wasn't my kind of fun, but my pride, stubborn as ever, betrayed me. "Fine," I said. "I'll go inside. Alone." The moment the words left my lips, I regretted them. But it was too late. The laughter, the jeers, the pats on my back, they sealed my fate. That's how I found myself standing before the rusted gates of the old hospital just after midnight, clutching a weak flashlight and trying to convince myself I wasn't about to make the worst mistake of my life. The building loomed against the night sky like a giant skeleton, its windows shattered, its walls blackened by fire. The iron gates screeched when I pushed them open, the sound carrying across the empty lot like a warning. I glanced back once. My friends stood far behind, barely visible in the shadows, their phones raised to record. They wouldn't follow me in. They never planned to. This was my dare, my punishment. The hospital doors were still attached, though crooked on their hinges. I pushed one, and it swung open with surprising ease, revealing a corridor that stretched into pitch-black nothingness. The smell hit me first. Mold, smoke, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. My flashlight beam quivered as I raised it. The walls were peeling, charred in places, covered in faded graffiti left by other thrill-seekers who'd dared to enter. But underneath the paint and soot, I noticed something stranger. Scratched words etched into the plaster itself. "We never left." I swallowed hard, telling myself it was just vandalism. Still, my throat felt dry. The silence inside was suffocating. No wind, no insects, no sound of life at all. Only the groan of the building as it settled, and my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. I kept walking, forcing myself deeper, past collapsed ceilings and broken gurneys. My light flickered across a shattered wheelchair that seemed frozen mid-turn, as if someone had abandoned it in a panic. And then I heard it, a faint, dragging sound, somewhere ahead of me in the dark. I froze, heart hammering. The sound stopped too. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, the building shifting, but then it came again, closer this time. A slow, deliberate scrape along the floor. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound, my hands trembling. The beam landed on an empty hallway. Dust hung thick in the air, but the floor. The dust was disturbed, footprints, fresh, leading deeper into the hospital. I should have turned back then. I should have laughed, called it quits, and walked away. But something, pride, fear, or maybe the hospital itself, kept me moving forward. And with every step, I felt it more strongly. This place wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. Crossing the rusted gates. The footprints on the dusty floor wouldn't leave my head. They were too clear, too fresh. Whoever had made them couldn't be far ahead, and that thought chilled me more than the cold air pressing against my skin. I told myself it could have been a squatter, maybe another group of kids who came here before me. But the hospital had been locked up for years. No electricity, No working doors. No reason anyone would want to stay here unless they couldn't leave. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked in the empty hallway. It didn't sound like me. It sounded smaller. Probably just rats, I whispered. But rats didn't leave human footprints. I pressed deeper into the hospital, each step sinking me into silence. The corridor opened into what must have been the main waiting hall. The ceiling was half collapsed, letting in a shaft of pale moonlight that stretched across the cracked floor tiles. Rusted chairs were scattered like bones, some overturned, others melted by fire. On the far wall hung a sign, faded but still readable. Admissions. I couldn't explain why, but the sight of it unnerved me more than the rest. A reminder that once people had walked in here full of hope, believing this place would heal them. They had no idea it would become their tomb. My flashlight flickered. I smacked it against my palm, muttering under my breath. The beam steadied, but now the shadows looked different, longer, like they were stretching toward me. I decided to keep moving, to prove this hospital was nothing more than bricks and ash. The double doors to the next corridor were half burned, blackened around the edges. I pushed through and found myself in a long hallway lined with patient rooms. Some doors hung open, revealing overturned beds and shattered glass. Others remained shut, their small windows covered in grime. I peeked into one room and immediately wished I hadn't. The walls were smeared with soot, but in the center of the floor was something that made my stomach clench. A hospital bed, perfectly upright, its white sheets untouched by time. Not a speck of ash, not a hint of decay, as if someone had just made it. I stepped closer, drawn against my will. The sheets looked impossibly clean, glowing faintly in the dim light. I reached out a trembling hand, fingers brushing the fabric. It was warm. I yanked my hand back as the faintest sound drifted through the room. A whisper. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like a hiss, the sound of breath drawn too close to my ear. I spun around, but no one was there. The hallway was silent. Too silent. I backed out of the room and nearly tripped over something lying in the corridor. At first, I thought it was rubble, but when my light hit it, my blood ran cold. It was a file, a patient's file. The cover was charred, but the name on the front was still clear. Adil Khan. My name. The file slipped from my shaking hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Pages spilled out, covered in scribbled notes and diagrams I couldn't understand. My date of birth, my blood type, my childhood address. This wasn't possible. I stumbled backward, my breaths ragged, and crashed into something behind me. A wheelchair. It hadn't been there before, and sitting in it was a shape. Human-sized, slumped forward, wrapped in scorched sheets. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The figure raised its head, and in the beam of my trembling light, I saw its face. My face. Echoes in the empty hallways. The thing in the wheelchair lifted its head fully, and I stumbled back, my chest heaving. It wasn't exactly me, but it was close enough to freeze the blood in my veins. Its face was pale, blistered in places like melted wax, but the eyes, those eyes were mine, staring at me as if they had been waiting. I blinked once, twice, and the wheelchair was empty. Gone. I backed into the wall, pressing myself against the cold, cracked plaster. My flashlight shook so badly the beam jumped across the ceiling, cutting through the shadows. For a second, I thought I heard laughter, distant, childlike, but when I listened harder, the sound was gone. I whispered to myself, "It's in your head, just the dark messing with you." But deep down, I didn't believe it. I forced myself down the corridor past the rows of ruined rooms. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, louder than they should have, bouncing back at me in strange patterns. Sometimes I heard a second step after mine, slightly delayed, as if something else was following. I stopped walking. The echo didn't. It took 2 more steps. My chest tightened. I spun around, shining my light back down the hallway. Nothing but peeling paint and collapsed ceiling tiles. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, hiding just out of sight, watching. At the end of the hall, I found a sign pointing in two directions: pediatrics to the left, surgery to the right. For reasons I can't explain, the word pediatrics sent a shiver down my spine. I turned right toward surgery. The corridor narrowed, the air turning damp and foul. My light revealed abandoned trolleys, rusted scalpels, shattered IV bags clinging to the walls like skin. On one gurney lay a pile of ash shaped almost like a body. The smell of smoke clung to it, thick enough to sting my nose. I pressed on, telling myself that once I reached the end, I'd turn back. I'd had enough proof, enough terror to satisfy my friends, but the hospital wasn't done with me. Halfway down the hall, I froze. I could hear breathing, not mine. It was faint, wet, rattling, as if lungs were struggling for air. My light swept frantically from side to side, landing on door after door. Most were closed, but one stood open just a crack. The sound was coming from inside. I should have kept walking. I should have left it alone. But something about the rasping breath pulled me forward. My hand trembled as I pushed the door open. Inside was an operating room. The ceiling lights were shattered, the floor littered with broken glass. Rusted surgical instruments lay scattered across the counters, and in the center, on the operating table, lay a figure under a white sheet. The breathing grew louder. I took a step closer. The sheet shifted, and then, in a voice as broken as the air itself, it spoke. 80. I stumbled backward, slamming into a tray of scalpels that clattered to the floor. My flashlight flickered wildly, shadows twisting across the walls like grasping hands. The sheet slid down, inch by inch, revealing a face burned beyond recognition. Charred skin clung to bone, eyes wide and hollow. Yet somehow it smiled. And when it did, I heard it, my own laugh, coming from its mouth. I bolted from the room, not daring to look back. My footsteps thundered through the corridor, my breath ragged. But no matter how fast I ran, I still heard it behind me. Echoing footsteps, echoing laughter, chasing me through the dark. And for the first time that night, I realized something terrifying. The hospital didn't just want to scare me, it wanted me to stay. Forever. The room with locked cabinets. I didn't stop running until my legs burned, until my lungs screamed for air. The corridor twisted and turned until I had no idea where I was anymore. The hospital wasn't just big, it was alive, rearranging itself, trapping me deeper with every step. I slowed, pressing my hand against the wall, trying to steady myself. My flashlight beam darted across the hallway until it landed on a door. Unlike the others, this one wasn't charred or broken. It was intact, painted a dull gray, with a rusted placard that read, "Storage." A shiver crawled down my back. Something about it felt wrong, but it also felt deliberate, like the hospital had led me here. The handle resisted at first, then groaned as I forced it open. The room inside was small and windowless. My light swept over metal shelves stacked with glass jars, all of them filled with murky liquid. Floating inside were things I didn't want to name, shapes that looked like twisted organs, bones, maybe even something with fingers. I tried not to gag, keeping my focus on the far wall. That's when I saw them. Cabinets, 6 of them, lined side by side, each one heavy and bolted shut with thick chains. The metal was scorched, blackened by fire, but the chains looked new, as if someone had locked them recently. I should have turned around and walked out, but I didn't. My hand, trembling, reached for one of the cabinet handles. The moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, I felt it. A vibration, a low hum, like something alive inside. I pulled my hand back, my heart hammering, but then I heard it. A sound that froze me in place, whispering, from inside the cabinets. I held my breath, straining to listen. The voices were faint, muffled, but clear enough to make out words. "Addie, open it. Let us out." My stomach dropped. They said my name. The whispers grew louder, overlapping each other, pleading, begging, screaming to be released. The chains rattled on their own, clinking like they were straining against whatever held them in place. I stumbled back, my light quivering across the cabinets. The voices rose to a chorus, the metal vibrating violently now. Then one cabinet door slammed forward, chains snapping taut. Something inside was trying to break free. I pressed myself against the shelves, glass jars clattering dangerously close to falling. "Stop it," I muttered, my voice cracking. "This isn't real. This isn't—" But the hospital didn't care what I believed. The chains on the middle cabinet snapped. The door burst open. Dark smoke poured out, curling across the floor like ink in water. The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath turning white in the beam of my light. And then, from the smoke, a hand emerged. Charred black, skin peeling, nails clawed and sharp. It gripped the cabinet frame, followed by another hand. Slowly, something began pulling itself out. I froze, too terrified to move. Its head emerged, burned, featureless except for a wide mouth that stretched open in silence. And yet, I heard it. A scream. Not out loud, but inside my head. A scream that wasn't mine. I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. The whispers chased me down the hallway, seeping through the walls, calling my name over and over. I didn't stop running until I collapsed against another door. This one marked with a faded sign barely hanging by one screw. Intensive care. The whispers stopped, but the silence that replaced them felt worse. Much worse. Because when I looked down, I realized something impossible. Ashy black fingerprints were smeared across my arm, as if something had touched me. Whispers that weren't mine. The ashy fingerprints on my arm wouldn't fade, no matter how hard I rubbed at them. They weren't dirt. They weren't soot. They looked like something burned into my skin, faintly glowing under the trembling light of my flashlight. I staggered backward, the sign above the door rattling slightly as if in warning. Intensive care. My pulse hammered in my ears, but for some reason, my hand reached for the handle anyway. The door groaned open, heavy and reluctant, as though it didn't want me to enter. Inside, the air was thick, damp, and colder than ice. Rows of hospital beds stretched into the darkness, their sheets shredded, their frames bent and blackened. The smell was unbearable. Smoke, rust, and something faintly sweet, like rotting flowers. But it wasn't the beds that made my skin crawl. It was the voices. At first, I thought they were faint echoes, maybe memories trapped in the walls. But as I stepped deeper into the room, I realized the whispers weren't fading. They were growing clearer, and they weren't coming from the beds. They were coming from me, my throat. I froze, clutching at my neck. The whispers slipped through my lips, but they weren't my words. My own voice echoed back at me, layered and wrong. "Don't leave us. We are you. We are yours." The panic hit me like a fist. I clamped a hand over my mouth, but the whispers kept spilling out, muffled and distorted, crawling into the room like smoke. The beds stirred. One by one, the shredded sheets began to rise as though invisible bodies were lying underneath, pushing upward. The air filled with the sound of groaning springs, the metallic squeal of rusted frames shifting. "Stop it," I whispered, though my voice wasn't mine anymore. It was dozens of voices overlapping, male and female, young and old, all speaking at once. Something slammed against the far wall, hard enough to rattle the ceiling tiles. My light darted toward it. One bed had tipped over, its frame twisting as though something inside it had tried to claw its way out. I stumbled backward, my beam cutting across another bed. This one was occupied. Not by a shadow, not by smoke, by a figure. Thin, burned, eyes hollow and sunken. It turned its head toward me with a sickening crack of bone, its mouth moving silently. And yet I heard its words inside my head. "You never left." The whispers in my own throat rose to a scream, a sound that tore through the room like static. The beds shook violently, sheets whipping into the air as invisible forces thrashed against them. I couldn't take it anymore. I dropped my flashlight, fell to my knees, and clutched my head, trying to drown it out. "Stop!" I roared, and suddenly, silence. Complete. I gasped for air, my lungs burning. My body trembled, drenched in cold sweat. Slowly, I lifted my head. Every bed was empty again. The sheets lay flat. The room was still. My flashlight rolled on the floor, its beam casting long, eerie shadows. I grabbed it with shaking hands, ready to run. But before I could move, I noticed something scratched into the floor tiles right beneath me. Words. Fresh, jagged, carved deep into the stone. "Welcome back, Adil." I stumbled out of the intensive care ward, the door slamming shut behind me so hard it rattled the hallway. My breathing was ragged, my vision spinning. That's when I realized something else. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were quieter now, but they were inside me, waiting. Shadows behind the curtains. The hallway beyond the intensive care ward felt narrower than before, as if the walls had crept closer while I was inside. My flashlight beam shook across peeling paint and broken ceiling tiles. Every step echoed, too loud, too alive. The whispers inside me had quieted, but they weren't gone. They waited beneath the surface of my thoughts, murmuring faintly like restless sleepers. I passed door after door until I came upon one slightly ajar. A torn cloth curtain hung from the ceiling just beyond it. For some reason, my chest tightened the second I saw it. Curtains in hospitals are meant to separate patients to give them privacy, but in this place, privacy felt like a trap. Still, something compelled me forward. I nudged the door open, and the hinges wailed in protest. The room inside was lined with partitions, half-broken metal frames, their curtains tattered but still hanging. They swayed gently, though there was no draft. My light swept across the first one. Nothing. I should have turned back right then. But my curiosity, or maybe the hospital itself, pulled me in deeper. The second curtain bulged, as if something was standing behind it. My heart thudded in my chest. I reached out with trembling fingers and yanked the cloth aside. Empty. I let out a shaky laugh, more out of desperation than relief. But when I turned, I noticed something terrifying. The curtain I had just opened had closed itself again. Cold crept up my spine as I spun the light around the room. Every curtain now seemed heavier, thicker, as if shadows behind them had grown. My breathing quickened. Then I heard it. The sound of fabric moving. One curtain swayed violently like something had brushed past it. Then another. And another. Soon, the entire row of partitions was alive with motion, curtains billowing as if invisible figures were pacing behind them. "Who's there?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The hospital. Always the hospital. I backed away, but before I reached the door, one curtain on the far end slowly parted. Not ripped. Not blown open. Slowly. Carefully, as though hands I couldn't see were pulling it aside. My light caught something in the darkness beyond. A figure. It stood tall and stiff, wrapped in a patient gown, its skin a patchwork of burns and peeling flesh. Its head tilted unnaturally as if it had been broken and forced back into place. I froze, my light trembling. It stepped forward. Then another curtain opened. Another figure. Then another. And another. Until half a dozen burned patients stood in the open, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their movements in perfect, synchronized silence. I stumbled backward, my chest heaving, my flashlight barely staying in my grip. That's when the whispers inside me surged again. "Don't run. They're waiting. Join us." The figures began to move, not walking, but gliding across the floor, their feet dragging soundlessly. Their shadows stretched unnaturally long, spilling across the tiles toward me like dark rivers. I bolted for the door. The moment I touched the handle, a curtain to my left burst open. A burned hand shot out, its charred fingers brushing against my arm. The same ashy fingerprints bloomed instantly on my skin, glowing faintly. I screamed, ripped myself free, and shoved the door open, slamming it behind me. I collapsed in the hallway, gasping, my body trembling with cold sweat. My arm burned where the hand had touched me, the fingerprints pulsing like a heartbeat. I knew now what this place wanted. It wasn't just haunting me, it was marking me, claiming me, and there was no one left to save me from it. The operating theater. I dragged myself down the hall, clutching my arm where the glowing fingerprints still pulsed. My skin felt alive, like something beneath it was moving, waiting to crawl out. Every step echoed like a heartbeat through the ruined hospital, and the whispers inside me grew louder. The hallway twisted again, and I found myself facing double doors. Heavy, metal, smeared with rust and soot. Above them, the faded letters read, "Operating Theater." I should have turned away. God knows I wanted to. But my feet moved forward on their own as though the hospital itself had reached inside me and wound up the gears. The doors groaned open. The room beyond was vast, lit faintly by a sickly green glow that had no source. Rows of seats climbed the walls in a half circle, where students or doctors once watched surgeries below. Now they were empty, except I could feel eyes on me. The operating table sat in the center of the room. Rusted metal, stained leather straps, the surface blackened with burns, and yet it wasn't empty. A shape lay upon it, covered by a sheet. My throat went dry. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But my flashlight trembled toward it anyway. The sheet shifted. I froze. Something beneath it breathed. Shallow, ragged, unnatural. The whispers inside me surged, overlapping in 1,000 tones. Help us. Cut it out. Finish the work. The sheet slipped back on its own, revealing the figure underneath. It was me. Charred, burned, lifeless, and yet alive. My face, my body, strapped down to the table, skin peeling, eyes rolled white. Its chest rose and fell with rattling gasps, the sound of lungs drowning in smoke. I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat. No, this isn't real. But the figure's mouth opened, and my own voice spoke. You were always meant to stay. The straps snapped open as if cut by invisible hands. My burned double sat up, its movements jerky, unnatural. It swung its legs over the side of the table and stood, skin splitting as it moved. The whispers inside me screamed now, filling my skull, my veins, my lungs. My body convulsed, as though the thing on the table was pulling me apart. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my head. My flashlight rolled across the floor, its beam spinning wildly. When the light passed over the observation seats above, my stomach turned to ice. They weren't empty anymore. Every seat was filled with burned figures in patient gowns, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their jaws moving silently in unison. And though no sound left their mouths, their words thundered inside my skull. Take your place, become one of us. The double reached for me, its charred fingers extending, ash falling in soft flakes from its skin. My arm burned where the fingerprints had marked me, glowing hotter and brighter as if responding to its call. No, I screamed, forcing myself to stand, stumbling toward the door. But when I grabbed the handle, it wouldn't move. The whispers inside me roared, laughing, mocking. The double was almost upon me, its hollow eyes staring into mine. In desperation, I turned to the only thing I could do. I grabbed my flashlight, raised it high, and swung with everything I had. The beam struck its face, and for a second, just 1 second, it vanished into smoke. The whispers stopped. The operating theater was empty again. But when I looked down, the ash from its skin still clung to my hands, and the mark on my arm burned hotter than ever. The last exit. I ran down the endless hallway, the glowing fingerprints on my arm pulsing hotter with every step. At the far end, I saw it. Finally, a door glowing with white light. My heart leapt. An exit. The whispers inside me hissed in protest. "Don't go. You belong here." Shadows slid along the walls, burned faces pressed against curtains, mouths opening in silent screams. But I didn't stop. I charged forward, slammed into the door, and pulled it open. Blinding light swallowed me whole. For a moment I thought I'd escaped, until my eyes adjusted. I wasn't outside. I was in another room. The same cracked tiles, the same stench of smoke and rot, and in the center, strapped to an operating table. Me. Not burned, not hollow, just me. Alive, breathing, terrified. My double's eyes locked on mine, wide with panic, silently begging for help. My knees buckled. No, this isn't real. The whispers inside me laughed, their chorus rattling my skull. You never left. The me on the table began to scream, but the sound tore from my throat instead. 1,000 voices shrieked through me, filling the room, shaking the walls. The straps snapped and my double sat up, reaching toward me. I stumbled back, but before I could move, its fingers brushed mine. The world went black. When I opened my eyes, I was outside, standing before the abandoned hospital, silent, lifeless. I almost believed it was over, until I looked at my arm. The fingerprints still glowed, pulsing like a second heartbeat. And then, in the silence, I heard them again, inside my head. Welcome back, Adil. The end. Or maybe just the beginning.